What's up everyone, John Rettinger from Techno Buffalo here with the release of the Nexus S. It's the second officially sanctioned Google smartphone that's been available, the first being the Nexus One. So while these might be a bit outdated hardware on the Nexus One versus a new refreshed Nexus S, I know a lot of you out there own Nexus Ones. They're probably curious if it's going to be worth the upgrade. So let me go ahead and show you the differences between the two. Let's go ahead and get started. So let me jump right in with a few disclaimers. We're obviously dealing with a close to last generation hardware on the Nexus One, still relatively modern. However, the Nexus S is using a lot of newer processors and certainly the newer operating system on Android, which is of course Gingerbread. So whether or not this is going to be a comparison of Froyo versus Gingerbread, 2.2 versus 2.3 is probably going to be a lot of differences that we're going to see here. In addition to a little bit more efficient processor, which we'll talk about in just a minute, on the Nexus S. So this isn't going to be a typical head-to-head battle with different rounds. That wouldn't necessarily be fair. I just want to show you differences between the two phones, and you can try and figure out which one is going to be right for you. So let me preface this with saying that each phone has just about been completely restored. Nexus S just came as a fresh install about 2 days ago. The Nexus One did a complete fresh install yesterday. So before we jump in and start talking about everything, let me clear the memory on each. So we're dealing with the fair comparisons. So Android 2.3, as I showed you in my Gingerbread walkthrough, has a built-in memory app manager. So I'll go into Manage Apps, and I can go right into Running, and I can kill everything that's running with the exception of Google services. So go ahead and select that. We'll stop running Gmail. Android keyboard, not going to let me stop. So mostly everything is stopped except for Google services, which is pretty much always running, but I'll try and stop that anyway. See what happens. Settings we need to keep. So everything else is fresh and clean. We'll go into a task killer here and we will kill all selected apps. So now we're dealing with at least clean memory on both. So let me refresh some of the specs that we have here. On the Nexus One, we have a 1 GHz Snapdragon processor. The same processor still found in a lot of new phones coming out right now. It's got a micro SD card slot for expansion, so you can go up to, I believe, as high as 32 now. On the back, it's got a 5 megapixel camera with autofocus and flash. 3.7-inch AMOLED screen with a resolution of 480 by 800, and that's all being supported by 512 megabytes of RAM and ROM. The new, just released Nexus S has a 1 GHz Cortex A8 Hummingbird processor. Same processor that we've seen in the Galaxy S series of devices, and very similar in architecture to what we see powering the iPad and the iPhone 4. Now, not in all tests, but in the majority of tests that has been run comparing these two, the Cortex A8 has been a bit more efficient. So we'd expect this to be a little bit faster. Of course, it's running the newest version of Android 2.3, which is only going to help its speed increases. Once the Nexus One gets Android 2.3, we'll have to retest this and see if there's any sort of speed differences that we see. This has 16 gigabytes of internal storage, no micro SD card slot, oddly enough. Has a similar 5 megapixel sensor on the back with autofocus and flash, but it also has a VGA camera on the front for video chat or what else you want to take pictures of yourself on the front. It's got a little bit larger 4-inch screen, which is Super AMOLED, so you're going to get darker darks and richer colors, but you're also going to get a bit of tint, a little bluish tint to the screen. You may be able to see that here on camera. It has the same resolution of 480 by 800, also has 512 megabytes of RAM. Alright, so let's do some speed and performance tests here and see what the differences are. I think one of the best ways to sort of garner processor and memory management is to jump right into an application that doesn't have much practical use, but it's kind of fun to play with, and that's Google Earth. So I've downloaded that on both of these devices. We'll go ahead and launch them and see how well they handle. Alright, so unsurprisingly, the Nexus S sort of launched things a little bit quicker and it's ready to go. We still got a bit of a loading thing here. And a lot of these increases that we're seeing may very well be from Android 2.3, not necessarily related to the hardware and the software. But the way these two phones are now, this is the best way we can compare. It looks like that's switched on over. Okay, so this is good to go as well. Let's see how smooth things are. Both look to be handling things pretty nicely. If I zoom in, let's try to zoom in here. A little bit slower on the Nexus One. You can see as I roll around, go ahead and pull back just a little bit, enough so you can see it. There we go. If I roll around on the Nexus S, relatively smooth. If I do the same thing here on the Nexus One, it's a little bit jumpy, but it's not bad and certainly usable. So this is probably one of those places where you get a minor increase in graphics efficiency on the Nexus S than you do on the Nexus One. Certainly this reason alone is not going to be a particular reason why you'd want to ditch your Nexus One and go pick up the Nexus S, but it's something to think about. And again, this may be related just to Gingerbread. I'm not going to focus on the differences in Gingerbread. We actually did a comparison doing Android 2.2 versus 2.3, but certainly you can see some differences right at the top. All right, so let's go back home. Go back home now, and let's try launching the same applications on each. We will launch Angry Birds Seasons, and I'll go ahead and let it launch all the way till it's ready to play. So I'll go ahead and try and hit those at the same time, which is sometimes more difficult than you think. All right, looks like I didn't, oh no, I did get it. Looks like it launched a little bit faster on the Nexus One, and it's still launching on the Nexus S. That's sort of surprising. All right, so the Nexus S actually launched the Angry Birds application a little bit faster. That might be because it's been optimized for 2.2. It might be just because the Nexus One did it faster. Not sure, but that was sort of an interesting result. All right, so we'll go ahead and jump back. The one thing that I did install on the Nexus One after the fresh install, in addition to the applications that you see right here, is Flash. So both do have Flash support. Let's go ahead and launch a website and see if there's any differences in speed. And both of these are connected to the same Wi-Fi network. Go ahead and launch Techno Buffalo, and we'll see if we can do the same thing here as well. I'll go ahead and type in Techno Buffalo. It should be right there, ready to go. So I'll do a refresh, and both of this, obviously the sites have been loaded on each of these devices, so it'll be representative of sites you visit on a regular basis. So we'll go ahead and hit that, and we are off on each. All right, so it looks like the Nexus S showed itself a little bit earlier. Nexus One came back nice and quick. Nexus S is done, and the Nexus One is still loading. Now, I will tell you, almost a year later since the Nexus One came out, it's still a very fast phone and really holds its own against some of the newer phones that are being released today. So there you go, there's some differences between the two. And hopefully on a site like this, you can see differences between the screen as well. That Super AMOLED really does make colors pop. It also has sort of that curved contour display that you might not be able to see so well. It doesn't really have much practical ability. It feels nice when you're scrolling your finger over it, when it's up to your face as well. It's got a bit of a higher quality feel. Speaking of higher quality, let's talk about build quality of the two devices. The Nexus S was made by Samsung, and the Nexus One was made by HTC. HTC, at least in my opinion, has a really solid industrial build quality, and that translates very nicely to the Nexus One. The phone feels very solidly built. There's some metals on the back, soft touch plastics. The Nexus S built, Nexus S rather, built by Samsung, has a plastic back and doesn't have that same high quality feel I think you get with the Nexus One. So when it comes to build quality, I'm definitely going to give the edge to HTC over Samsung here. Alright, so let's continue with sort of talking about some of the other features of the phone. And we'll have to talk a little bit, I suppose, about Android 2.3. We're not going to get into that much detail with it. Alright, so let's go ahead and see what's going to come standard with the apps. So these are both sort of standard Google experiences, so you can see how quickly the application tray loads. You got some 3D rendering down there, and things do load very quickly. One of the niceties that the Nexus S has over the Nexus One, again, this is a preference thing, and it's also security industry, and it's also a Android 2.3 thing, the keyboard. Certainly there are tons of third-party keyboards you can use to plug in to make this a totally moot point, but I certainly prefer the keyboard on Android 2.3 found on the Nexus S. So finally, I want to run a benchmark test on both of these guys. I've got Quadrant here, which is a pretty decent benchmarking application. I'm going to go ahead and run them on each, and then I'll come back and show you the results. If you want to see these tests being run, I'll put them at the end of the video so you can watch sort of the whole test and run the whole gamut of it. So let's go ahead and get started with that. Okay, so the results are in. The Quadrant test actually crashed the Nexus S the first time, had to be run a second time. You can see the results here. Let's go ahead and look at the Nexus One. Hopefully all that'll be in focus for you guys and you can see it. It's second, right below actually what surprisingly a Nexus One didn't recognize this as a Nexus One. You see the Motorola Droid, HTC Evo, Droid X, Galaxy S. There's another Nexus One down there, probably with Android 2.1. And you can see the score there is a little over 1250, so very nice score, showing the phone is still very quick and very fast. If we look at the Nexus S here, you see the score is noticeably higher. Go ahead and bring that into focus, just over 1500, and was actually the highest of any of the phones we tested including the Nexus One. And these are all sort of scores that Quadrant pulls in from other devices. Nexus One, Droid X, HTC Evo, Galaxy S, and a few others. The interesting thing is the Galaxy S. That might show differences between the TouchWiz skin that's on the Galaxy S and Android 2.3, because spec for spec, they're very similar, the Nexus S and the Galaxy S. So I guess in conclusion, is it worth jumping off ship from your Nexus One to run out and pick up a Nexus S? The answer is probably not. The Nexus One is still a very, very, very quick phone. If you're one of those people that has to have the latest and greatest and you want the Super AMOLED screen, you want a bigger display, and you want to have that new operating system right now, certainly 2.3 will make its way to the Nexus One, you then go ahead and make an upgrade. One of the problems that I failed to mention with the Nexus One, and I've mentioned this in every Nexus One video, it might be unique to my video, are these capacitive buttons at the bottom of the Nexus One. I've had a horrible time, right there's where they are, had a horrible time working with them. Sometimes they don't respond. They're much more responsive on the Nexus S, although you don't have on the Nexus S any sort of a navigational pad, like you've got that little scroll ball there on the Nexus One. Anyway guys, hope you enjoyed this comparison of the two devices. If you look right here, by the way, you can also see the big differences between the Super AMOLED screen. The black just look blacker than on the Nexus One. Anyway, I will see you guys in the next video. Be sure to check out Techno Buffalo for all your tech news and for exclusive content. Check me out at Twitter, twitter.com/John4Lakers. Bye-bye. Alright, so go ahead and hit launch on each of these. And this isn't a speed test for how quickly the application loads, it's just a benchmarking test. So we'll hit OK, we'll do the licenses there, and we'll go ahead and run full benchmarks on each. And even right here, you can really see a difference between the black levels on the Quadrant test. It looked much darker on the Nexus S than they do on the Nexus One. It's like it crashed on the Nexus S. That's weird. Try that again.